Welcome to halftime. Len Berman with Paul McGuire as you see Seattle bouncing back nicely from their San Francisco debacle last week. All the scores and highlights, some interesting results so far. Chicago big over undefeated Buffalo. It is 24-3 as they approach halftime. And Walter Payton watching from the sidelines, the former Bear, loving what he sees from Jim McMahon. He's having a big afternoon against the Bills defense. Nobody's been able to do this yet this year, but the Bears have solved the riddle. This is Ron Morris connecting with McMahon. 63 yards. Chicago took a 14-3 lead. How's it going for Jim Kelly of Buffalo? Well, driving, fires the perfect pass to the crossbar. That's what you call a perfect post pattern, Paul McGuire.
That's where you run to the post, you hit the post. We did the feature at the beginning about the Chicago Bears. #1 on defense, #1 in rushing and offense. They have a variety of things. Neil Anderson said that. Jim Kelly's having his problems. The Bills, when they get inside the 20, cannot score. They can't score against the Bears.
And they're struggling today. A wild one going on in Philadelphia. Houston led 16-0. The Eagles have now come back to take the lead 17-16. As Buddy Ryan has had certainly an up-and-down day for him, particularly for his punter, John Telchik. First quarter, it is blocked by Eugene Seal of Houston, Chris Dishman of Purdue with the touchdown. But wait, more to come. Telchik goes to punt once again in the first quarter, and once again is blocked, this time by Eric Bears for a safety, 9-0. It was 16-0 before the game was 7 minutes old. But Glanville's cheers would turn to groans as the Eagles came back. Randall Cunningham to Greg Garrity. Gorgeous play for the touchdown. 17-16, Garrity replaced Mike Quick, who broke his leg. He is out 8 to 9 weeks. Now, Indianapolis at New England. The Colts have just scored as they near halftime. It is 7-7. Dickerson's already near 100 yards. Pittsburgh leads Cleveland 9-7. That game in the second quarter. Your game, Seattle over Atlanta, 17-3 at halftime. I'd like to show you one highlight from this game. Kurt Warner, as he is having a fine afternoon. 12 yards, touchdown, 4th touchdown this year. Seattle took the 7-3 lead, and of course Steve Largent has caught a pass in 157 straight games. The Giants and Lawrence Taylor back. He has 2 sacks, 17-9 over Washington. The Battle of the Bays, Green Bay and Tampa Bay. They are 10-10 as they near halftime. More of our NFL Live halftime activities coming up right after these words from your local station.
Back at halftime, I'm Gail Sierens. Earlier on our pregame show, we talked with Dr. Robert Voy, Chief Medical Officer of our Olympic team. He spoke about the use of performance-enhancing drugs by top-flight athletes. He estimated that as many as 50% of the players in the NFL use steroids, and he suggested that the only way to curb drug use is to test players on 48 hours notice instead of the current policy of telling them well in advance when they'll be tested. For some, this kind of surprise testing raises questions of civil rights violations. John Wiestart of Duke University Law School is a specialist in sports law. He is joining us now. Doctor, would testing an NFL player on 48 hours notice violate his constitutional right?
Gail, a lot of the public discussion that one hears in the newspapers about testing suggests that the common issue that runs throughout all testing is this question of a violation of civil rights. I think it's really important to make clear, and just as crystal clear as we can, that in the context of the NFL, the Constitution does not come into play, that the NFL is essentially a private employer, and the whole issue in the NFL is one of labor relations, and that is, does the employer have the authority either from the collective bargaining agreement or from some other source to engage in testing. So it's really not a question of civil rights. It's much more a question of what did the parties agree to at the bargaining table.
So they can, in fact, negotiate away their constitutional right, as it were?
Again, they would not be negotiating away a constitutional right because the Constitution doesn't come into play. But it does indicate a really important point about what's going on in the NFL, and that is that we're in a period now where collective bargaining has broken down. So there is a bit of a legal cloud that hangs over the NFL's testing program. That cloud would be eliminated if we ever got to the point where, again, the union and the employer were able to find their common ground at the bargaining table. If that happened, we would then essentially have the situation we have in the NBA, where, as far as I know, nobody is raising any legal controversy about the enforceability of the NBA drug testing program.
What is the difference between testing, say, an NFL player versus an NCAA player and an Olympian?
there really is a very significant difference. Your question about constitutional rights is directly applicable where NCAA athletes are involved. In the case of Olympic athletes, obviously the U.S. Constitution doesn't have any application. The events involving Ben Johnson affected a Canadian citizen who was running in Seoul, Korea. So we shouldn't be so presumptuous as to assume that our Constitution would apply. The NFL, again, is entirely different. It's not a question of international law. It's not a question of the U.S. Constitution. It's a question of what happened at the bargaining table. And it's a really pretty good example, again, of the extent to which the employer, the NFL owners, really need the union. And what they need is a testing program that the union has agreed to. If that happens, as we can expect it eventually will, then any residual legal issues essentially will go by the board, and the testing program will be upheld.
Very interesting, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Gail.
Obviously, steroids are a problem, whether we're talking about the NFL or an amateur athlete, and something has to be done about it because it poses a serious health risk.
It sure does, and the question has to be, how far will athletes go to try to enhance their performance? Will they endanger their own lives? Well, Dr. Robert Voy of the U.S. Olympic Committee told us a chilling tale.
I don't know whether you're aware, but some years ago, prior, I think, to the '84 games, a study was done that on a group of athletes, Olympians, asking them the question whether or not if they took a pill, an anabolic steroid in particular, that would mean a gold medal for them. However, having taken the pill, they would die in 5 years from the result of the medication. Would they indeed take the pill? Over 50% responded that they would indeed take it. That's the danger of these particular substances. The drug is so pervasive and so capable of putting on muscle and increasing strength that it's difficult to control.
That gives whole new meaning to winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. We'll be back with more of our NFL Live halftime activities in just a minute.